thanks to the team at Trust for the invitation. Thanks to Wasim for setting it up. Thanks to Max for that really fascinating presentation, which I think really gave voice to some of the things that I'd been feeling about one of the frustrations I've had as the designer of this game, which we'll be playing later tonight, and I'll be talking about today, Billionaires and Guillotines, which is that often in sort of left-wing spaces, people will say to me, like, well, this game is very competitive. Why isn't it cooperative? Shouldn't, like, a left-wing game that's about, challenging systems of domination be cooperative? And I think Max's presentation gives us a lot of very good argument for why cooperative games are not necessarily in and of themselves, better politically. I'm a little bit tired today, so apologies if I'm a little less articulate than normal. What I thought I would do is maybe just walk you through Billionaires and Guillotines, why I made it, how the game works, and some of the reasons behind it. That's connected to a kind of parallel project. So Billionaires and Guillotines just finished its crowdfunding campaign. We're going to go to print later this summer, and it should be in stores and available for order and fulfilled by November. But at the same time as I've been working on the game and the game design, I've been working on a book which is tentatively titled The Player and the Played. And the subtitle I want is How Financialization Led to Fascism. We'll see if that publisher goes for that. Who knows? Maybe by then fascism will have been crushed and we will no longer need to have subtitles like that. Sadly, I think that won't be the case. And it's been really rewarding for me, as Max alluded to be doing both the work of the critic and the work of the game creator and seeing how those two roles can mutually inform one another. Very briefly, Billionaires and Guillotines is a board game for 2 to 5 players. In it, you take on the role of rival plutocrats, a property speculator, a war profiteer, an aristocrat, a media baron, and others. And you compete to grab the wealth of the world in the form of assets. However, as you do so, the game starts to collapse itself from the inside. Crises begin to spin out of control, and eventually those crises can lead to a revolution, in which case all of the players lose because they have their heads chopped off in the anti-billionaire revolt. It's my first game that is going to be produced commercially, thanks to my partnership with Pluto Press, who has published many of my books and is also the publisher of a series that I edit called Vagabonds. This is the first board game they or I have published. And you'll see I'll be showing you a lot of art tonight, which has all been done by Amanda Preeb, who is here in the room. Thank you, Amanda, for all of your work on the project and putting up with us as well. Let me zoom out for a moment, and then I'll zoom back into the game itself. Here's some of the questions that I'm thinking about that are at the overlap between the game and the book I'm working on. I'm interested in thinking through games to answer a series of kind of high-level questions about our political moment right now. Largely, I think what is interesting to me about games, well, one of the many things that's interesting to me about games is that games are models of complex systems. And for a game to be a game, players have to find a sense of agency within it. They need to feel, one of the sine qua non of a game is that when you leave the gaming table, when you leave the magic circle, you have the recollection of the game and that your participation in the game somehow changed the game. Arguably, and I know I'm making a bit of an overstatement here, but if you go to a theater or you go to a cinema, the outcome of the play or the outcome of the film didn't change very much whether you were there or not. But the outcome of every game you play will be changed by your participation in it. So ultimately, a game is a system. And what makes it game-like, what makes it fun, ultimately, is that you find some sense of agency within it. You find some way of changing the game. Whether you win or lose, you change it. And this gives us a really interesting platform to explore questions about how we find agency within the society and economy and political realm in which we find ourselves. That's one of the things that's fascinated me about games as not just a thing I could make to propagandize my awful, violent left-wing fantasies, as fun as that is, also as a way of exploring difficult social issues, especially in a moment where I think without going into too much elaboration or detail, most of us in this moment of capitalism we live in, this financialized, digitalized, chaotic moment of capitalism, feel two contradictory things at once. On the one hand, I think we feel we have almost no control and almost no ability to predict, anticipate, plan, and act in this world. We feel that the major things that impact our lives, both collectively and individually, are beyond our control, unless you happen to be very, very wealthy or powerful, in which case, mazel tov, good for you, but, you're the exception, sorry. At the same time as we feel that sense of helplessness and a kind of decay or sabotaging of our agency as both individuals and collectives, we live in a financialized capitalist system that has insisted we all become players, which is to say, and this will come as no surprise to the people in this room who I'm sure have read much of the literature that's explored this over the last decades, we have all been asked to become financiers of the self, to invest in our portfolio of skills, our abilities, our capacities to tap our social networks, to leverage the assets in our lives, be they education, relationships, our CV and portfolio, in order to try and play the increasingly uncertain markets of life. And so on the one hand, we are told and we are taught to be players, and on the other hand, we constantly feel like we're being played. And my book kind of looks at this particular affective intersection and links that, of course, to the larger forces of political economy. But then also asks, how does that particular contradiction then awaken, invite, and produce a kind of fertile territory for the emergence of a uniquely 21st century form of fascism, which I don't need to tell you is all around us, here in Germany and around the world. But sort of finally, the question for me is, well, then is there any role for games at all in helping us imagine, create, experiment with, think through, develop other forms of agency? Other ways of being and being together, other ways of acting and acting together in this world that might be adequate to this moment. Because one of the things that my work on financialization as a scholar has done over the last few years is point out that this form of financialized capitalism is very good at capturing and harnessing our agency. The system is not some sort of like dystopian nightmare. I mean, it is quite nightmarish, but it's not a kind of dystopian 1984 draconian tyranny where all of our actions are controlled, although, of course, if one looks at the state of the surveillance apparatuses today, one could be mistaken for seeing that shadow. Nonetheless, it is a system that I think its operations at the level of the subject and its operations at the level of political economy and capitalist valorization depend on transforming all of us into this kind of player character, to tapping, to harnessing, to seducing our forms of agency. So then is there forms of agency that we might imagine, that we might devise, that we might invent, that we might rediscover that have existed at other times or in other places in the past that might evade these forms of capture and that might actually be the grounds on which we could build a revolutionary subjectivity? Because at this point, I think the absence of revolutionary politics is simply suicidal, given the state of the world. I have a hunch that games can probably help us do that. I have a hunch that through games we might be able to think through and experiment with these new forms of agency. I think that can certainly happen in certain circumstances by cultivating skills in cooperative games that allow us to cooperate and build new skills for cooperation that we will need and that we do need to sort of survive and replace capitalism. I also think that we might be able to cultivate those skills and capacities and forms of agency through competitive games as well. So I'm working right now on a competitive game, Billionaires and Guillotines. This is a picture from our launch in London of the Kickstarter campaign, which was thankfully successful. So the game now has enough funding to be actually manufactured. And as I mentioned, you can order it now from Pluto Press. If you go to their website and you search for Billionaires and Guillotines, you'll come to the page and you can pre-order it. And as I mentioned, it should be shipped in October, hopefully, and November. I will say that I can't make any promises because the global logistics situation is very volatile for obvious reasons. I will also say that an adult's life spent studying and trying to understand capitalism does not actually prepare you to do a capitalism, it turns out. I've learned a lot about manufacturing a product and getting it to consumers, which has been very interesting. But yeah, so we're trying to make sure that it does get there by October also for the Christmas market. Because you would probably want to play this game with your family, if you have a family like mine. So as I mentioned, in Billionaires and Guillotines, you take on the role of billionaires, pictured here, the property speculator and the media baron. And through the game, you trade cards that you take to your hand to buy these assets, like a scam charity, a mercenary army, a think tank, or a golf course. Various things that billionaires in our real world like or want or use in various ways. And it's all fun and games, and the game begins quite swiftly. You have a really good time. You feel very powerful at the beginning of the game. But very quickly, the game starts, the assets start to become scarcer and scarcer. And you start needing to use kind of dirty tricks to get the assets away from your opponents, like ratting them out to the government so that they can be audited, or scamming, or gaming the market, or otherwise, defying the laws of neoliberal economics to get your way. The game is built in levels, so I really want to make a game that would be very playable by people who don't like games and don't play a lot of games, but then you could add on layers of complexity as you go. So in the second level, you add in the next level of complexity, where as you compete tooth and nail to grab these assets, your actions begin to beget social, economic, environmental, and political crises. So for instance, floods, militias, all sorts of things begin to kind of unravel. And as they unravel, rebels will start to gather. And I should say, maybe just to give you a peek behind the curtain of the game, that the rebels in this game are a bit ambiguous. They're not necessarily heroic left-wing rebels. They're not necessarily always reactionary right-wing rebels. There's a kind of, the game puts you in the perspective of a billionaire who is somewhat agnostic about and somewhat ignorant about politics. And that is intentional. I didn't want this game to just come across immediately as a piece of sort of left-wing propaganda. I wanted it to dwell, to maybe go back to the reference to Brecht, always a busy ghost in Berlin, to go back to Brecht, that this game would in some ways represent and parody the situation, but for instance, like in Three Penny Opera, strangely make you sympathize with the wrong people as a kind of teaching moment. I've been thinking about the idea of a learning game to respond to Brecht's idea of a learning play. That the possibility is that the game doesn't give you all the answers and it's not beating you over the head with propaganda. It's actually creating a moment of dialectical tension and productive alienation where something starts to happen in the player's mind itself, which is a much more tricky thing to do than, just kind of good old left-wing propaganda. In the game, however, when the billionaires, when the crises accumulate and the rebels accumulate, if too many rebels accumulate, there's a revolution and all the billionaires lose. But there is one cooperative moment in the game called the panic. And here the billionaires can actually put aside their differences for a moment and try and negotiate a kind of peace where they sacrifice some of their assets collectively in the name of repressing the revolution or distracting the population. So for instance, here is the card that allows you to collaborate on imposing fascist rule by making a certain kind of sacrifice. You can also agree to pay a luxury tax. You can also foment an imperialist war. For those of you who've read your Rosa Luxemburg, this is just basically a gamified version of the accumulation of capital, but it's more fun than reading all 1,000 pages of the accumulation of capital. In the third level of the game, we add in rules. So the billionaires start to gain special powers based on their relationship to the broader political economy of which they're a part. So you can, for instance, be a gangster who gets to steal from your opponents. You can be an insider trader who's able to manipulate the game. You can be a banker who gets to cheat. You can be a toady who pegs your victory to another player's. There's a variety of sorts of rules that you can play. Now, usually in most games that I play with people at playtests, people usually get up to level 2 or maybe level 3. But there is a level 4 and a level 5 for people who come back to the game. Because I think there's a lot of games that are political that you maybe would play once. Like, I consult a lot of people who are trying to make political games these days, and the usual question I ask them to begin with is like, is this a game you want people to play one time and they get the punchline and they go away? Or is this a game that you want to be actually like genuinely fun and that people would play multiple times? And is there something different you want them to learn at each iteration of the game? I am interested in the latter for Billionaires and Guillotines. So in level 4, you also get to bribe the government. There's a mechanism where you start stuffing money in envelopes and trying to use it to influence government policy, either to favor your billionaire's industry or to undermine your opponents. In the level 4 game, there is also a space program which you can invest in to try and get off the planet before the revolution happens. And leave your competitors behind. And what I'm working on right now is the promised expansion kit, the first expansion of the game called Reform or Revolution. And in it, I've added a kind of a social deduction mechanism. So it begins that one player decides they're not going to be a billionaire, but instead they're going to be kind of an agitator character. But at the beginning of the game, you get a card indicating whether you are a well-meaning reformer who works with the billionaires to try and solve the crises by getting the billionaires to pay their taxes. Very sweet. Or you might secretly be playing a nefarious revolutionary accelerationist who is basically trying to run the game right into the revolution as quickly as possible. And if you're the revolutionary, you would play the reformer for a time and then sort of unmask yourself. And then you start playing by another set of cards. And those cards for the revolutionary character simulate some of the things that many of us have experienced in social movements. The billionaires will try and undermine you by defaming you in the media, by hiring spies, by hiring fascists and cops. You will try and defeat the billionaires by taking them hostage or, pulling a Luigi or whatever it is you're going to do, organizing mass protests, etc., etc. So that level of the game also tries to simulate something about what it's like to try and organize against sort of monumental forms of power. I don't want to speak for too much longer. We could talk a little bit in the Q&A about how this game helps me think through some of these questions with which I began, about how people find agency through games, how this capitalist system captures our agency and puts it to work, and how we might define other forms of agency. I suppose one thing that I would say about the game is just to recall what I've been sort of learning from Brecht and others, and some of the game designers I most like. One of the things that I think is most important to remember about games is that games are almost always by their nature transgressive. And one of the most interesting things you can do as a game designer, and one of the things that I think left-wing game designers or game designers who are interested in a project of collective liberation lose to right-wing or fascist game designers, is an embrace of transgression. So yeah, I mean, I'm probably not going to be the one who's going to be actually operating the guillotine, and I hope we don't need to use a guillotine. I hope there can be a peaceful, metaphorical euthanasia of the billionaire class, and they will give up their wealth and just become miserable scumbags like the rest of us. You know, this is my hope for a peaceful revolution. I think we would be delusional to believe that, but, you know, I hope that will happen. I hope that there doesn't need to be guillotines. Nonetheless, I think that there is a function here of dwelling with the transgressive imaginary that for a long time has been sort of banished from left-wing thought. And here I'm not suggesting that we need, 100,000 leftist edgelords going out there making off-color jokes about cutting off people's heads or pulling a Luigi, but maybe one or two. And I think that there is something to be said for what happens in social groups when you bring people together and have consensual, transgressive forms of fun. I think there is an interesting politics to transgression that Brecht certainly understood and was working with in various ways. And I think we can also think through with the game space as a space that separates itself out from the rest of the world, the rest of politics in a certain way. at the same time as I say that, I also announce my discomfort with it as well. I mean, I enjoy the game and I enjoy playing it and I enjoy propagandizing it, but there is something uncomfortable also about dwelling with and joking about these themes of violence, and including violence against protesters and people I am and love, which is also part of the game as well. But I think maybe just to quote Brecht again, in the dark times will there be games? Yes, indeed, there will be games about the dark times. Let me just close by mentioning that on July 11th, we're having a symposium in London. And if any of you who are interested in games, I would very much invite you to join us. It's called What is the Anti-Fascist Game? It's a kind of self-organized symposium at Pelican House in London. It is the kind of warm-up, the sort of a discursive warm-up event for the Games Transformed Festival, which will take place that night and the following day. Which this year is dedicated to the theme Bash the Fash. So it's an anti-fascist gaming festival for video games, LARPing, board games, and all those sorts of ludic mayhem. So please join us in London on July 11th and 12th if you can. Tickets just went on sale for the festival, and you can apply to join the symposium until, I think, Saturday at reimaginingvalue.ca, or search for Games Transformed, which is the festival under which this is taking place. Great. Thanks so much.